Did you know that South Korea had its own Gamergate and it was way crazier than ours? Who doesn't love Stellar Blade? And after the stunning success of the game, Shift Up was riding high, the little South Korean studio that had somehow managed to outshine the biggest Western names in AAA gaming. The studio's recent celebration seemed harmless enough. A simple anniversary post for their other title, Goddess of Victory, Nikki. Balloons, confetti, a cake shaped like a gun, all the tongue-in-cheek extravagance you'd expect from a mobile shooter built on glossy art and even glossier character models. Nikki had reached its 1000th day, and Shift Up wanted to thank its fans in style. But within hours of the artwork going live, the festivities gave way to fury. A handful of players claimed that one of the characters was making a pinching gesture that was put there supposedly to mock men's anatomy. Yeah, really. The simple precision grip was interpreted as a feminist provocation. Outrage quickly spread across Korea, with debates taking place over whether or not the developers were harbouring a subversive political agenda. Comment threads filmed with zoomed-in screenshots circled in red like crime scene evidence, speculative essays dissected the angle of the fingers, and social media lit up with accusations that the crab hand pose was a coded insult to Korean men everywhere. So, holding this bizarre scenario in mind, join me today to take a look at how a single drawing managed to ignite one of the strangest culture wars in gaming history. I am Lady Decade, and if you are a man of culture, then hit that subscribe button. Let's talk about the people who called your thingy small and the people who took issue with it. A lot of men in the West enjoy it so much when a woman points out how amoeba-like their members are that they'll actually pay for the privilege. Call it humiliation, call it whatever keeps your browser history interesting, but Korean men apparently aren't quite so, how should we say it, sporting about it. Fortunately, not everything from Asia is small and disappointing. Quite the opposite, in fact. The region's been responsible for some of the biggest, hardest hitting releases in gaming over the past few years, and if you fancy getting your hands on something truly massive for a very modest outlay, use my links below to score deals that'll make even BTS blush. Get 39% off Stellar Blade, 29% off Black Myth Wukong, 43% off Silent Hill F, and up to 90% off of thousands more. So happy shopping, and remember, when it comes to bargains, size really does matter. After the infamous artwork post went live, outrage began to spread with all of the precision and velocity of a missile strike. The supposed crab hand gesture, which to any rational observer looked nothing more than a hand holding air, was now trending across South Korean social media. The accusations multiplied like bacteria in a petri dish. Shift Up, the developer behind the game, wasn't just being accused of being careless, but intentionally subversive, with many believing that they had smuggled feminist messaging into their artwork, betraying the very players who had made them successful. And of course, pattern recognition would quickly go into overdrive. Fans dissected every frame of promotional material looking for further signs of ideological corruption. Content creators devoted entire streams to analysing the angle of each fingertip, and by the end of the day, to some, the image had become evidence about who was secretly working for the feminist underground. But in an interesting twist, rather than ignoring the criticism or accusing their fans of acting in bad faith, as employees at companies like EA or Ubisoft so often do in the West, Shift Up actually did the unthinkable. They addressed the disgruntled fan directly, acknowledging their concerns about feminism, and publicly apologised for upsetting their audience. Honestly, can you even imagine a Western studio doing that? They would sooner write a 12-tweet thread about why you are the problem They deleted the post, issued a public apology, and explained that the artwork had come from an overseas outsourcing team. Then, in an impressive show of accountability, ShiftUp didn't just stop there. They replaced the illustration, rewarded players with in-game compensation, and even established a new quality management department to prevent future misunderstandings. What could have been a PR disaster instead became a demonstration of how to handle controversy with grace. Rather than doubling down or mocking their core fan base, ShiftUp chose transparency, responsiveness, and respect, a refreshing contrast to the arrogance we've come to expect from most Western publishers. To outsiders, especially those in the West, the whole thing looked completely insane. The idea of a developer being hounded into an apology tour over the shape of a cartoon hand felt like something straight out of a satire sketch. But in South Korea, this wasn't some random overreaction. It was the latest flare-up in a culture war that makes ours look almost civil by comparison. By the way, if you ever need a break from all this modern outrage, head over to my other channel, Lady Arcade. It's my little nostalgia bunker dedicated entirely to retro gaming history. Recently, I've been diving deep into the glory days of Sega, including a half-hour look at the Dreamcast, the console that was way too clever for its own good, and a deep dive into the Sega Saturn, the beautiful disaster that deserved so much better. So if you'd rather escape culture wars and go back to a time when the biggest debate in gaming was who had the better ports, Saturn or PlayStation, go give Lady Arcade a visit after this video. I look forward to speaking with you over there in my comment section. Since around 2015, South Korea has been caught in a vicious tug-of-war between radical feminist groups and anti-feminist movements, each seeing the other as a direct threat to society itself. In that climate, even something as small as a gesture can be interpreted as a political statement, and that's exactly what, on the surface at least, seems to have happened here. A harmless pose, seen by some as resembling a controversial small penis hand sign used in past feminist protests, was enough to trigger a full-blown online crusade. In a culture where one poorly placed pixel can be mistaken for an act of rebellion, they did what any sensible company would: chose a brief public shaming over the risk of corporate ruin. To Western audiences, it all seems unthinkable, but in South Korea, this is just another day on the internet. At the centre of this entire scandal lies, of course, the hand gesture. So let me proceed to attempt to explain to you what all the fuss is about. The accusation traces back to a very specific subculture of South Korean internet life: Megalia, a radical feminist group formed in May 2015 during the MERS outbreak. The community built its identity around a tactic called mirroring, repaying what they perceive to be misogyny with what they perceive to be equal vitriol. Its members famously adopted a logo showing two fingers held close together, a deliberate provocation meant to ridicule what they claimed was the average Korean man's length of 6.9 centimeters. That number, as it happens, came from a 2003 Korean military study measuring flaccid lengths. But there is also some later research that puts the Korean length broadly in line with global averages. Korean men believe Megalia simply cherry-picked the smallest figure because it was funnier, weaponizing a medical statistic for maximum humiliation. But the group's, how shall we say, combative tactics soon fractured its base. When Megalia later banned homophobic posts, an even more extreme splinter called WOMAD emerged, doubling down on hostility towards men and anyone deemed insufficiently radical. From that point on, the crab hand symbol was no longer a political logo, it became the equivalent of a curse word in Korea, and this is where the madness begins to snowball. The turning point came in 2016 during the now infamous Kim Ja-yeon t-shirt incident. A voice actress was fired after being photographed in a shirt that read, "Girls do not need a prince," a slogan linked, however tenuously, to Megalia. The dismissal triggered protests, counter-protests, and a digital civil war. Westerners compared it to Gamergate, but in South Korea it was more extreme. It infected every cultural industry from gaming to advertising and everything in between with a contagious fear of association. And at the centre of it all was a logo, that simple hand gesture, 2 fingers pinching together, once a symbol of provocation, now a permanent stain. What began as Megalia's emblem of mockery had become a shorthand for everything people loved to hate about feminism. Nearly a decade later, it still haunts Korean pop culture like a ghost, lurking in the background of every new outrage, waiting to resurface in one particularly unfortunate anniversary post for Goddess of Victory, Nikki. Past this point, people started hunting for what they perceived to be hidden symbols everywhere. Advertising posters, anime art, and even supermarket packaging have all been accused of harbouring the same coded insult. The logic has the self-sustaining quality of a fever dream. Everything becomes proof, and denial only deepens suspicion. What seems to have been lost in all of this noise, though, is the basic understanding of how symbols work. They aren't magical and thus only matter when people collectively decide they do. A gesture that once meant small to a handful of provocateurs has somehow become a national flashpoint, not because the pose has changed, but because that shared sense of meaning completely collapsed. And in the vacuum left behind, paranoia soon rushed in to take its place. In 2021, a convenience store became a key battleground. A convenience store. GS25, one of the country's biggest retail chains, launched a harmless summer campaign, a bright, colourful, unthreatening little snack ad, the sort of thing you'd normally walk past without even noticing. But within hours, the internet noticed, and once the internet notices, it never stops. According to certain online forums, the shape of the woman's hand in the poster, the way her fingers delicately pinched the sausage, was identical to the crab hand used by Megalia. The ad was quickly claimed to be feminist propaganda in disguise. Expectedly, there was outrage everywhere. The enemy had snuck in and infiltrated the lunch menu. GS25 immediately pulled the campaign and issued an apology, but the hysteria only grew. A new version of the poster was uploaded with the hand cropped out and was then accused of harbouring another hidden symbol, the crescent shape of a moon in the corner, supposedly a nod to feminist iconography. The company tried again, replacing the moon with a slogan, only to have that too denounced as feminist messaging. At this point, even punctuation was political. Boycotts were organised, petitions circulated calling for the dismissal of those responsible. Employees were investigated, executives disciplined, and the designer, whose only crime was drawing fingers, was publicly humiliated. Within a week, a fast food poster had triggered corporate purges, governmental statements, and a nationwide witch hunt over snack-based sedition. During all of this mayhem, the GS retail president was quietly reassigned as the company scrambled to contain the backlash. To make matters even crazier, the more GS25 apologised, the guiltier they looked, and the guiltier they looked, the more apologies were demanded. It was the Ouroboros of outrage, a scandal feeding on its own absurdity until nothing was left but shame and silence. And due to all of this, by the end of the debacle, other companies began preemptively scrubbing their adverts of anything resembling the hand gesture, terrified of becoming the next target. Somewhere in Seoul, a marketing intern learned the hard way that hot dogs can be perceived as a hate crime against men. By 2023, the panic had evolved into something far uglier. The target this time wasn't a corporate poster or an inanimate sausage, but a person, a young animator working for Studio Puri, an external contractor producing promotional videos for Maple Story, one of South Korea's longest-running online RPGs. Puri had created a 30-second animation celebrating the game's latest update. Yet buried deep within it, in a single fleeting frame, viewers claimed to spot the unthinkable: a female character making the infamous crab hand. It lasted less than half a second, but that was all it took. Screenshots spread, videos slowed to quarter speed, and outrage snowballed. The animator was swiftly accused of being a Megalia sympathiser and infiltrator smuggling feminist messages throughout the game art. The online mob went into overdrive. Her name, her address, and social media profiles were plastered across forums. She reportedly received torrents of abuse, with even her family being targeted. In the court of public opinion, guilt was a foregone conclusion, a crime already carved into the internet's memory before anyone had asked whether she'd even drawn the frame at all. But when the truth finally surfaced, it was almost too absurd to believe. The supposedly incriminating animation hadn't been drawn by her at all. It was instead the work of a male colleague. The entire crusade had been built on a lie, a convenient fiction that let thousands of anonymous men play moral executioner for sport. The fallout was devastating. Studio Puri lost roughly 80% of its contracts, including future work with Nexon, as clients scrambled to distance themselves. Police eventually identified and charged more than 80 individuals involved in the harassment campaign, an almost unheard of outcome in a country where online mob justice rarely faces consequences. But by then, the victory was hollow. The animator's reputation was in ruins and her livelihood was gone. In less than a decade, the hand gesture had gone from meme to curse, and now it could cost you your career simply to exist near it. By the time the Nikki anniversary scandal erupted, the rules of survival for Korean developers were already written in blood, or at least in apology statements. Shift Up had already been through this rodeo once before. During the development of Stellar Blade, the studio faced its own wave of hysteria, a tug-of-war between Western journalists who accuse it of being sexist and domestic anti-feminists who accuse it of being too feminist. When everyone hates you for opposite reasons, the safest strategy isn't always integrity, it's invisibility. So when Goddess of Victory Nikki's 1000-day artwork blew up, Shift Up didn't just panic, it executed a textbook corporate self-exorcism. The studio's new quality management department has a name alone that sounds as though it had been lifted straight from the Ministry of Truth's staff handbook. Its stated purpose is to ensure that no hateful expressions slip through. Again, not a gesture, not a shape, not even a stray shadow that could be mistaken for feminism. Due to the perceived feminist incursion, the company's stock briefly wobbled as the controversy spread. Recently, director Hyung Suk Yoo doubled down in October 2025, declaring a policy of zero tolerance for hate speech. For many outside Korea, the whole episode seems laughable, a studio apologising for the shape of a woman's hand. But inside the country, it wasn't comedy, it was damage control. And so, what began as a cheerful celebration of Goddess of Victory Nikki's success ended up as something far stranger, a masterclass in outrage, where a drawing of a woman's hand became a symbol of sedition. A pose that once meant absolutely nothing turned into a lightning rod for every conspiracy simmering beneath South Korea's cultural divide. But while it's tempting to laugh this off as Korea being Korea, that would be missing the bigger picture. This isn't just their story, it's ours too. Where creators nervously measure the curvature of a line, companies build quality management departments to pre-approve imagination, and yet, through it all, Shift Up handled the fallout with remarkable composure. They stayed professional, protected their staff, and moved forward without the smug condescension or moral grandstanding we've come to expect from Western studios, in an industry where many would rather double down than de-escalate. That alone deserves credit. Still, it raises an uncomfortable question. If Western cancel culture punishes creators for not being progressive enough and Korea's punishes them for appearing too progressive, isn't it really just the same machine turning in opposite directions? I'll leave that one for you to ponder over in the comments section down below. Don't forget that through my links you can save huge money on a huge selection of titles. Get 39% off Stellar Blade, 29% off Black Myth Wukong, 43% off Silent Hill F, and up to 90% off of thousands more. Or if you want to support what I do in a more personal way, access my behind the scenes cosplay library and more by becoming a backer over on Patreon.